How did a Scottish friar, dead at 42, win a theological argument that had stumped the greatest minds of the medieval church, including Thomas Aquinas, and change Catholic doctrine forever? What kind of philosophical genius could prove that Mary was conceived without sin while simultaneously affirming that Christ is the universal Redeemer of all humanity? Why did this brilliant theologian's name become an insult, a word meaning stupid, for centuries, only to be vindicated when the Church officially declared he was right all along? This is the story of Blessed John Duns Scotus, the subtle doctor who used pure reason to defend the Immaculate Conception and proved that sometimes the most complex philosophy serves the simplest truth: God's love for Mary. The year was approximately 1266. In a small Scottish border town called Duns, far from the glittering intellectual centers of Europe, a child was born who would one day reshape Catholic theology. We know almost nothing of his early years. No stories survive of his childhood, no anecdotes of precocious wisdom. The records are silent. But we know this: he grew up in a land of mist and stone, where clan loyalty ran deep and the faith burned bright, despite the distance from Rome. Around 1280, when he was only 14 years old, the boy joined the Franciscan Order. The Franciscans, barely 50 years old themselves, were the order of St. Francis, the poor man of Assisi who had kissed lepers and preached to birds. They wore simple brown robes, went barefoot, and owned nothing. But they were also becoming something Francis might not have imagined: scholars. The Church needed minds as well as hearts, and the Franciscans were rising to meet that need. The young man from Duns showed immediate brilliance. His teachers noticed something rare in him: a capacity for logical precision that cut through confusion like light through fog. He absorbed Aristotle's philosophy, mastered the intricate debates of medieval theology, and developed a method of argument so refined that even his fellow scholars had to slow down to follow his reasoning. They began calling him John of Duns, identifying him by his obscure hometown. No one could have guessed that name would echo through centuries. In 1291, he was ordained a priest in Northampton, England. Then came the summons every ambitious medieval scholar dreamed of: Oxford University. One of Europe's two greatest centers of learning, Oxford was where minds were sharpened and reputations made. There, amid ancient stone libraries and fierce public debates, John of Duns became something more than a provincial friar. He became a force. He studied under the leading Franciscan masters. He devoured logic, metaphysics, theology, the Aristotelian system that dominated medieval thought. He mastered it completely. But he didn't stop there. He questioned, he refined, he improved. Where others saw settled questions, he saw opportunities for deeper precision. His method became legendary for its subtlety, meaning not sneakiness, but extraordinary sophistication. Every term defined with surgical exactness. Every argument built step by logical step. Every objection anticipated and answered. His reputation grew. The brilliant student from the Scottish borderlands was becoming Oxford's rising star. But academic success was just the beginning. The world was about to discover what this mind could do when it turned its full power toward defending the Mother of God. Medieval universities lived for the disputation. These were formal public debates where scholars clashed over the great questions of faith and reason. Hundreds would gather, students and masters alike, to watch brilliant minds do battle with pure logic. Your reputation rose or fell on your ability to argue, to defend, to demolish your opponent's position while leaving your own unassailable. And there was one question that had divided the Church's greatest thinkers for generations. Was Mary conceived without original sin? The stakes were enormous. Original sin, inherited from Adam, marked every human soul from the first moment of conception. It separated us from God, darkened our intellect, weakened our will. Only Christ, because of his divine nature, had escaped it. Everyone else needed redemption. Everyone was stained. But what about Mary? The woman chosen to bear God Himself in her womb, the mother of the Savior, was she conceived in sin like the rest of humanity? The majority of theologians, including the towering figure of Thomas Aquinas, said yes. Their argument seemed airtight. If Mary had no original sin, she wouldn't need Christ's redemption. But Christ is the universal Redeemer. Therefore, Mary must have been conceived with original sin like everyone else, then sanctified later in the womb. She was redeemed, just more perfectly than the rest of us. To claim otherwise seemed to deny Christ's universal redemptive work. A minority, mostly Franciscans, felt this couldn't be right. Something in their souls rebelled against the idea that even for an instant, even at the cellular level, the Mother of God carried sin's stain. It seemed fitting that the woman who would say yes to the Incarnation should be prepared for that role from the very first moment of her existence. But they couldn't solve the logical problem. How could she be sinless and still need redemption? By the early 1300s, John Duns Scotus was teaching at Oxford, then at Paris, the other great university. Perhaps even greater than Oxford, Paris was the theological capital of Europe. And it was there, in 1307, that the debate reached its climax. The disputation was announced. The question, can it be defended that the Blessed Virgin Mary was conceived without original sin? Hundreds packed the hall. Masters, students, curious clergy. Everyone knew this question had stumped the best minds. Everyone knew Aquinas himself had answered no. John Duns Scotus stood to present the minority position. What happened next would change theology forever. He began with a phrase that would become legendary. Potuit, decuit, ergo fecit. God could do it. It was fitting. Therefore, He did it. 3 simple Latin words containing a revolution. God could do it. No one disputed that. God's power has no limits except logical impossibility, and there's no logical contradiction in conceiving a human being without original sin. God could do it. It was fitting. This was the heart of the matter. What's more appropriate for the Mother of God than to be completely pure from the first instant? If God was planning the Incarnation from all eternity, wouldn't He prepare the perfect dwelling place for His Son? Wouldn't the vessel that would hold the Holy One be itself holy? It was fitting. Therefore, He did it. If God could do it, and it was the most perfect and appropriate thing to do, then we should believe He did it. God doesn't do second best. But the objection came immediately, as Duns Scotus knew it would. What about Christ's universal redemption? If Mary never had sin, she didn't need redemption. And if she didn't need redemption, Christ isn't the universal Redeemer. This was the moment. This was where every previous defender had stumbled. Duns Scotus didn't stumble. He introduced a distinction so brilliant, so simple, that afterward people wondered why no one had seen it before. There are 2 types of redemption, he explained. One is liberative redemption, freeing someone from sin they've already contracted. This is what Christ does for us. We fall into the pit of sin, and Christ pulls us out. But there's another type, preservative redemption. This prevents someone from falling into sin in the first place. It's actually a greater mercy. If you see someone about to fall into a pit, isn't it better to catch them before they fall than to let them fall and then pull them out? Mary was redeemed by Christ. But she was redeemed preservatively, not liberatively. In foreknowledge of Christ's merits, God preserved her from original sin from the first moment of conception. She was saved by Christ's redemption, just like everyone else. But she was saved from ever contracting sin rather than from sin already contracted. Christ remained the universal Redeemer. Mary remained completely dependent on His saving work, but she never, even for an instant, carried sin's stain. The logic was airtight. It preserved Christ's universal redemption. It explained Mary's sinlessness. It satisfied both theological rigor and devotional intuition. The hall erupted in debate. Some, especially his fellow Franciscans, were immediately convinced. Others, particularly the Dominicans loyal to Aquinas' position, resisted. But no one could refute the argument. The subtle doctor had found the key. The debate would continue for centuries. The Dominican and Franciscan schools would clash over it for generations, but the terms had shifted. Duns Scotus had shown it could be done. The impossible had become possible. And slowly, year by year, century by century, his position would gain ground until finally, 546 years after his death, the Church would declare officially he was right. The architecture of thought. They called him Doctor Subtilis, the subtle doctor. Not subtle in the modern sense of sneaky or understated, but in the medieval sense, refined, sophisticated, capable of making distinctions so precise that they required complete concentration to follow. His mind worked like a master jeweler, turning a question over and over, examining every facet, polishing every surface until it reflected truth with perfect clarity. His theological method became legendary. Every term had to be defined with absolute precision. Every argument had to proceed step by logical step, no leaps, no appeals to emotion, just pure reason building toward inescapable conclusions. He anticipated objections before his opponents could raise them. He answered them so thoroughly that even his adversaries had to admit the force of his logic. Reading his works was like watching a master architect design a cathedral in the mind. Every stone perfectly placed, every arch precisely calculated to bear the weight of the structure above it. But beneath the technical brilliance lay something deeper, a vision of reality that differed from Thomas Aquinas in subtle but profound ways. Where Aquinas emphasized intellect as the highest human faculty, Duns Scotus emphasized will. For Aquinas, knowing the good inevitably leads to choosing it. For Duns Scotus, the will has a freedom that transcends even perfect knowledge. We don't love God because we understand He's the highest good. We love Him freely, and that freedom is what makes love real. God doesn't love things because they're good. They're good because He loves them. Love precedes and creates goodness. The will is higher than the intellect. Freedom is more fundamental than necessity. This wasn't just academic hair-splitting. It had profound implications. It meant that love, not knowledge, is the path to God. It meant that human freedom is more radical, more real than the determinists imagined. It meant that God's relationship with creation is fundamentally one of love freely chosen, not necessity logically unfolding. He developed a concept called haecity, meaning thisness. Every individual thing has a unique particularity that makes it precisely this thing and not another. You're not just an example of universal human nature. You have a unique thisness that makes you irreducibly yourself. In a world that often treated individuals as mere instances of universal categories, Duns Scotus insisted on the absolute uniqueness of every person. Each soul is singular. Each person matters individually. His Marian theology extended far beyond the Immaculate Conception. Mary's cooperation in redemption wasn't passive. Her yes at the Annunciation mattered. Her consent was necessary. God didn't override her will. He waited for her free response. She became co-redemptrix not by suffering equal to Christ's, but by cooperating freely in His work. Her intercession continues because her motherhood is universal. She is spiritual mother of all Christians, mediating grace to her spiritual children. The Franciscan school adopted his positions wholesale. A great divide opened in medieval theology, Scotists versus Thomists. Two approaches, both brilliant, both orthodox, emphasizing different aspects of the same truth. The voluntarists versus the intellectualists. Those who emphasized love versus those who emphasized knowledge. Both valid, both necessary. The tension between them enriched Catholic thought for centuries. He wrote constantly. His Ordinatio, based on his Oxford lectures, laid out his entire theological system. His Reportatio Parisiensis captured his Paris teaching. His quadlibettal questions tackled disputed topics from every angle. The works were dense, technical, difficult even for trained scholars. But they were also comprehensive, systematic, breathtaking in their scope. By 1307, he was at the height of his powers. He'd taught at Oxford with great success. He'd conquered Paris, the pinnacle of medieval academia. He was producing a complete theological synthesis that rivaled Aquinas' own Summa. At 41, he had decades of productive work ahead of him. Then came the letter from his superiors. A new Franciscan studium had opened in Cologne, Germany. They needed a master theologian to organize the curriculum and teach the students. John Duns Scotus was being transferred. He packed his manuscripts and made the journey. Cologne was a city of churches and commerce, bustling and prosperous. The new Franciscan house was eager to learn from the great teacher. He began organizing classes, continuing his writing, training the next generation. He had no idea he had less than a year to live. The autumn of 1308 came cold and early to Cologne. John Duns Scotus, now 42, continued his work with the energy that had always driven him, teaching, writing, revising. His ordinatio still needed completion. There were questions to answer, objections to address, arguments to refine. The work was never finished. There was always more to say, more precision to achieve, more truth to defend. November arrived. The days grew shorter. In the Franciscan friary, simple and stark, the brothers rose before dawn for prayer. They taught during the day. They studied at night, by candlelight. It was the life Duns Scotus had known for nearly 30 years: poverty, prayer, intellectual labor. The Franciscan charism lived out in scholarly form. Then, suddenly, he fell ill. We don't know the exact nature of the illness. The medieval records mention only that he sickened rapidly, perhaps appendicitis, the silent killer that struck without warning. Perhaps a stroke, cerebral hemorrhage, the brain betraying the man who'd used it so brilliantly. Perhaps heart failure, the body simply giving out. Whatever the cause, it moved fast. Too fast for prolonged farewells or deathbed revelations. Too fast for him to finish his work. On the 8th of November 1308, John Duns Scotus died. He was 42 years old. In an era when 42 was not quite so young as it is now, it was still far too early. Thomas Aquinas had died at 49 and been called to heaven in the flower of his age. But Aquinas had completed his Summa. Duns Scotus's great work remained unfinished, sections incomplete, arguments not fully developed, questions raised, but not answered. His brother Franciscans gathered around the body. They washed it according to custom. They dressed it in the simple brown habit he'd worn for 3 decades. They carried it to the church and laid it before the altar. The funeral was attended by fellow friars, university scholars, students who'd sat at his feet and marveled at his mind. They buried him in the Franciscan church in Cologne, the Minoritenkirche. A simple tomb for a Franciscan who'd taken a vow of poverty. No grand monument, just a plain stone and a name. The sadness was profound. What might he have accomplished with another decade? With 2? The theological questions still unsolved? The opponents still unconvinced? The work unfinished? His students gathered his manuscripts. Multiple versions existed of many works, lecture notes from different years, student copies with varying accuracy. The task of editing and systematizing his thought fell to those who'd learned from him. They did their best, but questions remained. Which version was final? What had he intended to add? How would he have responded to certain objections? Pope Pius IX, in the Apostolic Constitution Ineffabilis Deus, solemnly defined as a dogma of the Catholic faith that the Blessed Virgin Mary was preserved from all stain of original sin from the first moment of her conception. The Immaculate Conception was now official Catholic teaching. Any Catholic was required to believe it. 546 years after his death, John Duns Scotus had won the argument. The definition explicitly drew on the theological tradition he had founded, the concept of preservative redemption, the argument from fittingness, the solution to the problem of universal redemption. It was all there. The Church had examined the question for centuries, weighed all the arguments, and concluded. The Franciscan Scotus, not the Dominican Aquinas, had been right about this one. The 20th century saw an explosion of Scotus studies. His works were edited, translated, analyzed. Philosophers recognized his originality. Theologians appreciated his Marian devotion. Historians acknowledged his influence. The word dunce was revealed as a historical injustice, a mockery of a man who deserved honor. And finally, after centuries of veneration by the faithful but no formal recognition, the beatification process began. On the 20th of March, 1993, Pope John Paul II beatified John Duns Scotus. 685 years after his death, the Church officially declared him blessed. The Pope praised his theological genius, his defense of the Immaculate Conception, his model of faith and reason working in harmony. He called him Herald of the Word Incarnate and of the Immaculate. The man called Dunce was now blessed. His feast day, November 8th, the day of his death. His patronage, theologians, philosophers, university students, all those who use their minds in service of truth. His example? Intellectual rigor in service of faith, complex thought devoted to defending simple truths, brilliant philosophy protecting beautiful doctrine. From ridicule to beatification, from forgotten to venerated, from dunce to doctor. The long arc of history had bent toward justice. The tomb in Cologne still stands. Pilgrims can visit the Minoritenkirche, the Franciscan church where John Duns Scotus was laid to rest in 1308. The stone is worn now, touched by centuries of hands. Students come before exams, asking the scholar's intercession. Theologians come to pay respects to the mind that shaped their field. Visitors come simply to marvel at the story, the journey from insult to honor. His theological legacy is immense. The Immaculate Conception, defined as dogma in 1854, rests on the foundation he built. Every December 8, when Catholics worldwide celebrate Mary conceived without sin, they're celebrating the truth he defended when it was unpopular. The solemnity of the Immaculate Conception is his feast of triumph. The mystery he explained with such precision is now proclaimed from every Catholic pulpit. His philosophical contributions extend far beyond Mariology. The primacy of will over intellect influenced entire schools of thought. His voluntarism shaped debates about human freedom that continue today. His concept of haecity, thisness, prefigured modern personalism's emphasis on individual dignity. His work on univocity of being became foundation for later metaphysics. Even those who disagree with his conclusions must grapple with his arguments. The Scotus school still exists, though now in dialogue rather than opposition with Thomism. Both are recognized as legitimate approaches to Catholic philosophy and theology. The rivalry that once divided universities now enriches them. The Church benefits from multiple philosophical traditions, different emphases, complementary insights. Scotus and Aquinas together, like Peter and Paul, like Augustine and Jerome, two giants whose different approaches illuminate different aspects of divine truth. For modern Catholics, his life offers multiple lessons. For intellectuals uncertain whether faith can survive rigorous questioning, here is proof that the most demanding philosophy can serve and strengthen belief. For those who think theology is dry abstraction, disconnected from real devotion, here is a man whose complex arguments flowed from simple love for Mary. For defenders of unpopular truths, here is someone who stood against the majority, including history's greatest theologian, and was eventually vindicated. For parents and educators, he models how to form young minds. The Franciscan Order, dedicated to poverty and simplicity, nonetheless produced one of history's greatest intellectuals. Simplicity of life doesn't mean simplicity of thought. Humble circumstances don't limit intellectual ambition. The boy from obscure Duns became doctor to the universal church. For those facing early death or unfinished work, he offers strange comfort. He died at 42 with his magnum opus incomplete, yet his influence shaped centuries. Quantity of years matters less than quality of contribution. One brilliant insight can reverberate forever. The work left unfinished can still bear fruit. Seeds planted, even in incomplete soil, still grow. His story reminds us that history's judgment is not final. For centuries, he was the dunce, the insult, the man whose name meant stupidity. But truth has its own timeline. 500 years after death, vindication came. The mockery was revealed as ignorance. The dunce was crowned blessed. Those who trust truth can wait for history to catch up. They know that in the end, in God's time, reality prevails over reputation. He remains, in the end, what he always was, the subtle doctor. The mind so refined it could distinguish what others confused. The philosopher so precise he could solve what others thought insoluble. The theologian so devoted to Mary that he used every weapon of logic to defend her dignity. The Franciscan so poor he owned nothing but ideas, and those ideas changed the world. On December 8th, when churches fill with white flowers and hymns to the Immaculate Conception rise toward heaven, somewhere in the eternal realms, Blessed John Duns Scotus smiles. The argument he made in Paris in 1307, facing a hostile audience, deploying nothing but pure reason and love for the Mother of God, that argument has become the faith of 1 billion believers. The question he answered is now settled dogma. The mystery he explained is now proclaimed truth. The dunce was right all along. He was a Scottish friar who died at 42, a philosopher mocked for centuries as the epitome of stupidity, a theologian whose name became the word for academic failure. Yet 546 years after his death, the Catholic Church examined his great argument and declared it true. Mary was immaculately conceived. God preserved her from original sin from the first moment of her existence. The impossible theological puzzle had a solution, and John Duns Scotus had found it. His life proves that intellectual rigor and deep faith are not enemies but allies, that the most complex philosophy can serve the most beautiful truth, that defending doctrine requires both love and logic, that one person, armed with nothing but brilliant arguments and trust in divine providence, can change the Church's understanding forever, that reputation is temporary, but truth is eternal. That being called a dunce for centuries doesn't change the fact that you were right. For every intellectual who fears faith will make them less rigorous. Look at Duns Scotus. For every believer who thinks doctrine is arbitrary or groundless, see how he built arguments like cathedrals. For every defender of unpopular truths, every voice crying in the wilderness, every prophet speaking to deaf ears, remember that vindication may take 500 years, but it comes. The subtle doctor waited centuries for his beatification. Truth can wait. It has eternity. From a small Scottish town to the universal church, from brilliant student to legendary teacher, from early death to eternal influence, from dunce to blessed, from mockery to doctor. His story is the story of truth defended, love pursued, beauty honored through the most unlikely means, pure reason in service of the Mother of God. The philosopher who proved that Mary's perfection was not only possible but fitting, the logician who made the impossible necessary, the subtle doctor whose subtle argument echoes still every December 8th in every church where believers proclaim, immaculately conceived from the first moment, without stain, exactly as he said, exactly as he proved, the dunce who was right, the blessed mind that changed forever how we understand the woman who bore God in her womb.